Welcome to Light Over Heat with Professor David Yamani. This week I have an excerpt from Module 6 of my webinar, 10 Essential Observations on Guns in America. This week we talked about gun violence and prevention strategies. Next webinar, number 7, which will be held on Wednesday, May 22nd, because I'll be traveling on Monday, will be the last webinar of the 7 I'm doing. The good news is that if you register anytime before that last webinar takes place, you will get recordings of all 7 webinars that you can watch at your leisure. 550 people are signed up so far. It would be amazing to get 600 people registered. So if you're already registered, I'd love it if you would share information about this webinar. It's in the show notes, a link to register for the Zoom webinar, and also some links to the syllabus for the webinar and the content we covered last week. You can also find the content we'll cover in Module 7. As always, I appreciate you taking some of your valuable time to learn from me about this material. If I've given you some value, please like and share this video. It really helps people who are outside my existing small but loyal network of followers to find out about my work. Now, this has led people to focus on better ways to deter people from doing gun crimes, right? If it doesn't have to always be the stick, maybe you throw a little bit of carrot in there. Maybe you fight gun violence not by declaring a war on guns, but by addressing the reasons why people actually want guns, right? So here moving, more from that a deterrent strategy into other strategies that sort of eliminate that demand. And I really was, I think, fortunate to read this book by David Kennedy, Don't Shoot, One Man, a Street Fellowship in the End of Violence in Inner City America, very early in my foray into guns, because he really fundamentally shaped the way I saw fighting gun violence without unnecessarily restricting firearms in the general population, right? So I listened to, before I read the book, I heard David Kennedy on NPR talking to Dave Davies. And, Dave Davies was curious. He's, in noting that he said, there's nothing really about gun laws in your book. Like, why are you not advocating for greater restrictions on access to firearms? Because, restricting the supply of firearms is a good way to reduce gun violence, obviously, in Dave Davies' view, right? And, that Kennedy basically said, that restricting firearms, like creating laws that generally restrict firearms, isn't going to help address the problem of inner city gun violence, right? And he actually laughed during the interview when, Dave Davies asked him this, and he basically said, how's that working for you? Like many people, Kennedy began this project on reducing gun violence in Boston, thinking that attacking illegal gun markets was the key solution. But in the course of doing his work, he really came to see things in a fundamentally different way and saw that you can address gun violence without targeting guns or without declaring a war on guns generally. So this is what some people call now focused deterrence, right? So in Boston, it was called Operation Ceasefire, right? It really focuses on a very small number of very high-risk individuals, right? And in very, what came to be called hotspots, right? Gun violence hotspots. And you target those people in those places with swift, severe, and certain punishment, right? So this is going back to Cesare Beccaria's work on deterrence, right? That deterrence, in order for it to be effective, has to be swift, severe, and certain. And the only way that you can have that kind of punishment is if you're extremely targeted or extremely focused in the people that you're trying to deter. It doesn't do any good to put out deterrence in general, right? And again, I think it was important in Boston. Boston's Operation Ceasefire did seem empirically to have success in reducing gun violence where it was the worst in Boston at the time. Uh, but again, important aspect of Kennedy's approach is that it wasn't just focused on the punishment in terms of deterring people, but it also tried to reduce demand for firearms by providing social services to people, right? Job training, mentoring, anger management, and it incorporated community leaders like clergy to be a moral voice, like encouraging people to think about the effects of their action, right? So, again, this is definitely a demand side approach, but it's interesting because it combines traditional deterrence, right, in terms of punishment to reduce demand, but also uses some of those um, um, underlying cause or root cause mitigation strategies to reduce demand for firearms. And another form, hospital-based violence intervention programs. A lot of the people who end up in as gunshot victims in hospital ERs are what medical professionals call frequent flyers. So Joseph Richardson, really smart uh, anthropologist, medical anthropologist at the University of Maryland, did a study, and he found that a third of the study participants had been hospitalized two or more times before for gunshot injuries, right? So, this, if you've been shot once, you're likely to be shot again, you're likely to end up dead. And there's no telling how many people that you try to take out before you go. So these people are really ripe candidates for this kind of violence interruption, right? You can get in there, you can say, hey, like, let's stop this before you die. So again, treats violence as a contagious disease, but these hospital-based violence intervention programs also, do some of the things that Kennedy's approach to focused deterrence does, which is to, again, provide social services, mental health counseling, legal assistance, mentoring, job placement, educational opportunities, housing assistance, right? There's a reason why poverty and gun violence overlap. So, again, trying to inoculate these victim offenders, right? They're both victims and offenders. Also uses credible messengers like the violence interruption programs do, addressing the trauma of violence and also the structural underpinnings, right? So going back to those more interventionist logics of gun violence prevention, right? And really talking here about root cause mitigation, looking at gun violence as a health disparity, right? It affects people in different groups differently. And so this map, I think, is very instructive because it shows in the city of Chicago the where poverty concentrates and where gun homicide concentrates, right? And the maps almost perfectly overlap with one another. And I actually have seen maps that were constructed for the city of Winston-Salem, which show the density of poverty and the density of all sorts of negative health outcomes, including likelihood of violent victimization, right? So, we're really looking at something that can be addressed at its roots without, again, creating any sorts of new regulations or regulatory structures around guns, or even, punishing people for simple felon in possession, which, again, a lot of people in the city of Chicago who are brought up on gun charges are basically felons in possessions. And as we know from last week, right, if you would rather be tried by 12 than carried by 6, that even if you have a felony, it's not going to prevent you from carrying a firearm, right? So again, let's reduce the root causes for that sort of behavior. And so here's something it's not simple. I would say it's actually probably very difficult and also expensive. But if you just clean up neighborhoods, right? If you remove what is called urban blight, and these pictures show what that looks like, right? Taking abandoned, dilapidated houses and rehabbing them, or taking a street corner that is just run down and full of garbage and planting some trees and some grass and putting a fence up. Those actually activities have been found, at least in this one study here, to have a significant effect on reducing firearms violence in those communities, right? Again, you can reduce firearms violence without addressing guns per se at all. And, again, so not easy, not inexpensive, but something that, clearly works. And this is not something that people don't know, right? If you go to the Liberal Gun Club's website, they'll talk about why root causes matter. That's a big part of their approach to liberal gun ownership. The Rocket Armory, which I got to know through the liberal gun owners, put out this shirt, "Guns don't kill people, systemic inequality does." That is, really a provocative shirt, but it gets at some very fundamental truth. And even Rolling Stone, has recognized very recently, this is from April 28th, pretty sure Tovis brought this to my attention, right? But stopping gun violence means building a social safety net and community, right? So you can reduce gun violence in a lot of ways that don't require us to worry about the very, controversial issue of gun rights versus gun control. Again, as I said, doesn't make it easy. These violence interruption programs and root cause mitigation, requires social investment, right? To, rehab those houses and to plant grass and trees costs money. And, spending money is politically divisive, right? I think this is why root cause mitigation is something that comes out of, the liberal gun club or the liberal gun owners, and not from your more right-leaning gun organizations. The other problem with some of these violence interruption programs and other root cause mitigation strategies is they're connected with other forms of gun control, right? So every town and Brady, they at the same time they're advocating for all of the whole slate of supply side solutions, including gun bans and other ways of making it harder to get firearms, are also promoting these other programs, and really then they become less than credible messengers, right? That people are who might otherwise be sympathetic to a gun violence intervention program. If Brady or every town is promoting it, a lot of people are not going to hear it because they're also promoting these other more blanket prohibitions on guns and gun ownership.